It's just coming up to the All Ireland final between Mayo and Dublin. Myself and Steven Poacher decided that what better thing to do than try and annoy people with power rankings of the teams in the football championship at the moment. Stephen, we'll put a few noses out of joint here, I expect.
Yeah, well, listen, Shane, the beauty of football is it's a game of opinions, and the beauty of it is it gives us something to talk about and debate long and hard into the into the dark evenings over the winter. So yeah, I'm sure we'll have a few disagreeers here now when we fire these out.
Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, it's completely up to your own interpretation. Some people would be like, well, Kerry got knocked out in the first round. They can't be inside the top 10, which of course would be insane to other people because they pushed Dublin closest last year. They're league champions. So it's completely up to your own
Yeah.
sort of taste how you would order these teams. Like Mayo being in the final doesn't necessarily make them number two because, they didn't get all that far last year. But we might as well jump straight to it and we'll start off with your number 10 and your number 9. So Cork at 10 and Cavan at 9. What made you go with that?
Well, I suppose uh, looking at it from my perspective, like right, I think Cavan probably deserve a bit of respect, okay, because they've come through the hardest province in Ireland in 2 consecutive years now, and have been in two Ulster finals in consecutive years. Albeit they were relegated to Division Three. I understand that, but I do feel that they're a county who have made massive strides from a championship perspective over the last couple of years. You look at Mickey Graham's record in the championship as well. Bar the Dublin result, every other game that he's played has been second to none. So I do feel Cavan warrant being in that, just squeezing in there. They are playing Division Three next year. Okay, I understand that. We've got to respect the fact, Shane, that they're the current Ulster champions as well. And in my honest opinion, I think this Cavan team could be around and knocking on Tyrone and Donegal's door over the next few years. Cork, on the other hand, they've squeezed it at 10. They are a county who I believe, Shane, should be higher than that. I just don't think they've warranted enough to be higher than that over the last number of years. Yes, they were in the Super 8s last year. They put in half-decent performance against Dublin, but they were beaten quite comprehensively by Tyrone as well in the Super 8. So I just think Cork are in there just in the top 10, Shane, from the basis of the point of view being that they're a county with massive potential, a county with huge potential, massive potential. They knocked Kerry out of the championship this year, but then they were beaten by Tip. Was that a huge shock? And we probably discussed it in the show. We probably said in the lead up to the game that we felt this was the sort of game Cork could lose. So until Cork sort of started probably producing a lot more consistency, reaching the last four or the last eight on a more consistent basis, then I would see them shooting up the rankings. But they've cruised out of Division 3. Their league form this year was absolutely superb. So we have to give them credit for that.
Okay, but there's no sign of Monaghan here. And I know they're not in your top 10 at all. And there's Monaghan fans out there who think we've been regularly to the latter stages over the years. We've been pushing, at a higher level than Cavan have. And I know Cavan beat Monaghan this year. And then for the flip side, for Tipperary fans, I'm sure they're nowhere near your top 10, yet they beat Cork.
Yeah, I think if I'm right in saying, I think Cavan beat Monaghan 2 years in a row. Championship. I think they beat them the year before as well in I think it was in Breffni. And this year they beat them in Clones. Monaghan probably feel aggrieved by being left out of it. Yeah, I totally agree, and it's something that was twisted in my head thinking about it last night. But I just do believe, Shane, that the last 2 years in particular in championship, and I've sort of looked at it over the last 2 years, and I just think Monaghan, yes, in 2018 they were beaten in an All Ireland semi final by Tyrone. Of course, I understand that, but in 2019, they weren't in the Super 8s. They didn't make the Super 8s. In my honest opinion, they're a team who are very reliant still, I think, on Conor McManus, and I think they're an aging team, and I think that they're a team, and Monaghan people will go mad at me for saying this, but I do think that they are a team that is slightly on the decline, and I think they've probably just been unfortunate to miss out on that top 10.
And still in all, they do have some excellent forwards there, powerful, hard-running team. You don't think they'd beat Cork even in a head-to-head? I think Cavan fans, fair enough, because of those recent victories, they'd get the nod.
Well, I'm looking at it, some of the teams that have got in here, like Monaghan versus Cork in a one-off championship game. Probably from a tactical point of view, if Monaghan were well set up, they could probably cause Cork problems. Monaghan, Galway, Monaghan. I just feel that the teams that I have in the top 10 here now, that if it was a one-off championship game, I fully believe right now where we are, I think these teams would beat Monaghan.
Yeah, that's fair enough. We'll jump back into the rankings here and put up your number 8 and your number 7. We've got Galway at number 8 and Roscommon at number 7. So what made you go with that order?
Well, for me, it's probably them two could probably alternate. Okay, there's probably a 7, 8, 8, 7, whatever. Roscommon, Galway, you would nearly have them in a par, in my honest opinion. It's very difficult, Shane. So what I've tried to do from a balance perspective for the power rankings is I've tried to balance it out as well from the 4 provinces. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to have a balance of teams from every province. The unfortunate thing for Leinster is that Dublin have ruined Leinster, so there's only 2 Leinster teams in it. But I've gone with 3 Connacht teams, Mayo, Roscommon, Galway to be in the top 10, of course. But for Roscommon and Galway, I think over the last couple of years, like Roscommon are Connacht champions in 2017. They're also Connacht champions in 2019. Though in the Super 8s last year, they're back in Division 1 next year. They probably just weren't squeezing in ahead of Galway in that perspective. Galway came into this year's championship with a lot of promise, the Padraig Joyce factor, the feel-good thing, the Galway way of playing football. And one of the things I wrote down when I wrote my notes here, Shane, was, has Cora Finn's huge success actually stalled Galway's success? And this is a question that we nearly need to delve in and look at in greater detail. Has the fact that Cora Finn have been so successful, Shane, over the last 5 or 6 years, has that actually been a negative effect on Galway?
I think there's probably something in it. Yeah, it possibly is to some degree, because whether it's Kevin Walsh's previous manager or Padraig Joyce now, he before they changed it to being the January All-Ireland finals as it was last year, they had to operate for several months, maybe 4 months, up to as far as 4 months, because between pre-season starting in maybe November, who knows, maybe earlier for some counties, all the way to March, he mightn't see those players, and he's had to gel his team and then try to shoehorn guys back in. So it definitely might hold them back a little bit.
Absolutely, and if you correlate that with Slaughtneil's success and Derry's demise, well, not demise, but their loss of form. If you correlate it with Armagh and Cross-McLean, when Cross were hugely successful, it was actually affecting the Armagh County team. And it's only really over the last number of years, Shane, where Cross haven't been the kingpins, that McGeady has sort of moulded now a sort of a more settled unit. And what you tend to find is, I experienced it myself with Carlow and Éire Óg. Éire Óg got a bit of a run in Leinster, I think it was May last year with Carlow, and the players weren't coming back in, Shane, till the new year. You had 3 weeks for a full panel to prepare for the National League, but they were coming back in a different mindset. They were coming back in with a club mindset, the feel good of the club, and being with all their friends at the club, and they were being hammered, the club, and then all of a sudden you have to sort of unite and knit those guys into a cohesive county team, and it can be very, very difficult, because there's obviously a level of resentment among other players in the squad as well. Look at them frickers, the success they're getting at club level, and it's just natural. There's club rivalries, and the longer you have to sort of mould and knit a squad together, the better it is. And I think Padraig Joyce, over the next few years, the big test for Padraig, obviously, this year is sort of everyone got a bye ball this year, Shane. Everyone got a bye ball because of how the circumstances turned out. But if you looked at their league form, early in the league they were going quite well. They were motoring quite well, and they weren't a kick in the arse away from beating Mayo. They weren't a million miles away from beating Mayo. They started very poorly, very sluggishly, and they started that game better. And the other thing as well, a bit of respect for them as well, they've been riddled with injuries this year. They were riddled with injuries to key personnel. So be interested to see Galway next year. And if we were to do this time next year, maybe they'd be in the top 5.
But I want to throw this at you. Roscommon's performance in the Super 8s, the big exacting games where you really find out where teams are at in the past couple of years. So 2018, they got battered by Tyrone, 424 to 212. Then they went on and played Dublin, got beaten 424 to 216. Then they also had a game against Donegal, which they were beaten 20 points to 13. Then you go 2019, battered by Dublin, 226 to 14. Lost to Tyrone fairly narrowly, 17 points to 13. And then they got that win down in Cork, which was a bit of a dead rubber. So, on the basis of that, when it comes to the big teams, even the year before, after a replay, Mayo smashed them. Whereas Galway got to an All-Ireland semi-final in 2018. The likes of Cork pushed Dublin really close in the Super 8s last year. And obviously they then lost to Cork, or lost to Roscommon. But it was a bit of a dead rubber, so it didn't matter. So what I'm wondering is, can the teams just below Roscommon feel a little bit aggrieved? Because Roscommon don't seem to be able to compete with the big teams when it gets to the knockout stages.
Well, you mentioned a number of teams there. You mentioned the teams that have beaten them. And the 3 teams you mentioned were Dublin twice, Tyrone twice, and Donegal. And for me, there probably is only there's Dublin, and then there's probably only on top of that, and we'll talk about it obviously closer to the top here, there's probably only 4 teams that can beat Dublin, in my honest opinion, at the current present moment in time. And Roscommon aren't one of those teams. I don't think Galway are one of those teams, and I don't think Cork are one of those teams. But in a one-off game, Galway against Roscommon, you're talking about possibly a coin toss there, you know. And I just feel with 2 provincial titles in the last 3 years, I feel they're warranted to be in there.
Okay, that's fair enough. We'll jump back onto the table again. So number 6 you've picked Meath, and number 5 Donegal. Correct me if I'm wrong, this is a Meath team that were absolutely destroyed in 2 Leinster finals in a row. But are you going to put that down to being more a Dublin thing than a Meath thing?
Yeah, there's no question about it. I think, and I tell you what actually probably swayed me a little bit here was when I listened to Jack McCaffrey's podcast during the week, and he spoke about how they were very respectful of Meath. And Jack McCaffrey is against the grain as a Dublin footballer. He's not the typical media-trained Dublin footballer, Shane, that watches what he says. You know, he's stepped away from it now, so he said a few things this week that probably got people going, whoa, you know, even the little story about him missing training in the lead up to the All-Ireland final and things like that. But one of the things, Shane, that he mentioned was that we respected this Meath side. You know, we sort of slightly feared them a little bit because they're coming. You know, they're a young side, they're coming. They've got a really good coach in Colin Nally. Their minors knocked Dublin out of the championship this year. We played their minors there recently, actually, in a challenge game just before the second lockdown. They're a fantastically phenomenal athletic side. Their under-20s are a decent side as well. They fancied their chances this year with that group. And I just think that they've got a lot of good structures in place in Meath. You know, they've got a good centre of excellence there as well. They've got their development squad seem to be sorted out. You know, there seems to be a real drive in developing and coaching in games in Meath. But I just think Meath are not a million miles away, Shane, albeit that we're hammered in that Leinster final. But if we look at the results that Dublin have had since, everyone has been in the end of that beating, you know, so it's not a unique thing. And I just feel that over the last number of years, particularly reaching 2 consecutive Leinster finals, their performances, as me and you discussed in Division 1, weren't that bad. They weren't that bad, you know, when you actually look at them. So, and I suppose if you look at it, they're going to be contesting Division 2 next year, but I could see them coming out of Division 2 quite comfortably next year.
Yeah, I'm even looking at their performances in the Super 8 last year. Now, they lost all 3 games and they ended up with a scoring differential of minus 26. But I think that was them kind of getting on the road a little bit, and they've kicked on a little bit from there. But if it's to jump to the power rankings again, do you see Meath beating Galway, Cavan, Cork? I mean, like Roscommon and Galway. Do you see them beating all of those teams?
Well, I do. Yeah, I do. I feel Meath. I think probably we need to look at it from a Leinster perspective as well. Psychologically, Shane, Leinster teams at the present moment in time probably aren't in a great place, you know. And we've seen in 2018 what Kildare could do to Mayo in a one-off game, you know. And I suppose a big contributing factor in the championship at the present moment in time is the venues of where games are at. And I think if Meath were to play Dublin in a different venue, we looked at their game in Parnell Park, albeit in a league situation. But I think Croke Park now, for this current Meath team, has got like some mental scars now coming from these Dublin defeats. You know, okay, they beat Kildare and beat Kildare quite comfortably, but at the present moment in time, Kildare are not in a fantastic place as a county, you know, at senior level. So, you know, we can't sort of give that an awful lot of credit. But if you look at Meath's performances in the championship over the last number of years, Shane, and come up against them in 2019 myself, and I was very impressed with once they got in front, the game was tight for about 32 minutes. And once they got a goal, 2 goals in the stroke of half time, 2 goals in 90 seconds actually. Second half, they really showed a level of ruthlessness. They brought on some young lads, young Conlon, and a couple of other young lads who were full of pace and full of flair. And you know, they've got a nice bit blend of athleticism. Brian Menton is a brilliant footballer in the middle of the field as well. So I think Meath could be a team. Now, the question is, at the top, Andy McAtee's been there, 4 or 5 years? Maybe a fresh face coming in might just reinvent that Meath team and might just kick them on. But yeah, if Meath were playing Roscommon tomorrow or playing Galway tomorrow, I would fancy Meath in a one-off game. Okay,
so let's look at Donegal there. And just as crucially, putting Tyrone in at number 4. This is a Tyrone team that lost to Donegal in the first round of the championship here. So I'd say there's some Donegal fans out there going, you've some cheek.
Well, I'll tell you why, right? And I'll tell you why. Tyrone 2017 All-Ireland semi-final, Tyrone 2018 All-Ireland final, Tyrone 2019 All-Ireland semi-final, and probably should have beat Kerry. Now, Tyrone were very unfortunate this year that they played the first round of the championship in Ballybuffet in ridiculous conditions. When you actually think back to absolutely ridiculous conditions. And I actually think Shane, thinking back to Tyrone's performance against Mayo the week before in the league, or 2 weeks before in the league, I felt Tyrone were going to Donegal in a really good place. And I think they were very unlucky that day. They were 5-1 up, 6-1 up, I think it was at the start of the game. They were in total control. And then Sean Patton's kick out over the top changed that game, changed the sort of the shape of the game, changed the direction the game was going. And I fully believe, Shane, that if Tyrone were to play Donegal anywhere but Ballybuffet, I think Tyrone would beat Donegal. And I do fully believe that. I looked at Tyrone's scores in the Super 8s last year as well, you know, and their run through the Super 8s to get to the semi-final. I think they were 5 points up or 4 points up at half-time against Kerry last year, and people were talking about Tyrone and the only team tactically fit to take on Dublin, etc. Maybe they'll have learned from 2018. And yes, there's probably a level of, you know, why are Donegal not above Tyrone, because based on this year. But, you know, it's just my opinion. I think at the present moment in time, over the last number of years, I think Tyrone have showed more consistency, in my opinion, over the last number of years than Donegal have had at the latter stages of the championship.
And yet, the flip side is Tyrone have consistently shown us that they can't manage big game situations. 2018 All-Ireland, 5-1 up against Dublin, I think you were reminding me the other day, didn't see it out. All-Ireland semi-final up against Kerry, didn't see it out. Even jump back to 2015, I think they were in a good place in the All-Ireland semi-final against Kerry, didn't see it out. Good position against Donegal this year, didn't see it out.
Yeah. And listen, look, you know, there's question marks over them now, and the new management team are in place. You know, Fergal, Logan, Brian Dooher, Peter Donnelly's back with them now as well. It'll be interesting to see now, you know, what impact that them guys make. But for me, Shane, if you actually look at this in twos, you know, Cavan, Cork, very tight, Galway, Roscommon, very tight. I mean, you probably throw Meath into that bracket. And Donegal, Tyrone are very similar. They're very similar, you know, and there's not an awful lot between the sides. I'm not saying that Tyrone are massively above Donegal. I just feel over the last number of years, Tyrone have probably been at the business end more consistently than Donegal. My only fear about Donegal is when they really had to win last year, they couldn't do it in Mayo. They couldn't do it.
Yeah.
When they really had to win to get to the last four. Mm-hmm. And they're yet to get to the last four, Shane, under Bonner. And all the talk is Donegal. And I said it here at the start of this show, when we started doing these shows in October, I felt Donegal were the one team who could possibly give Dublin a game, winter football, etc., and the way they play and the athleticism that they have. But then when Cavan went at them, the athletic grounds, didn't get over the line. Now, you could point back and say, if Donegal played Cavan in Croke Park, would Donegal beat Cavan? 9 times out of 10, I think they would. You know, but on the flip side of it, if Tyrone played Donegal in Croke Park, I think Tyrone would beat Donegal. You know, so it's that tight.
And do you know what? I think next year when you put Callum McShane and Conor McKenna in his second season, that's why I would agree with you here, because I think the trajectory, both are moving up, but I think Tyrone have more scope to move a little bit higher again. Now we jump. I'm going to bring up your 3-2-1 all at the same time. You've gone Mayo, Kerry, and you've gone Dublin. I think it probably goes without saying why Dublin are up at number 1. Although the final could change things, you never know. But why Kerry 2 and Mayo 3?
Well, look, you know, Kerry 30, 36, 37 times All-Ireland winners, I suppose, you know, tradition, history, etc. It does stand for a lot. And I think over the last number of years, you look at some of the scorelines Kerry have put up, Shane, like, you know, 120 last year against Donegal. Yes, Donegal done the same. It was 120 to 120. It was a fantastic game. Then they had, I think it was 122 against Mayo, was it?
Yeah, 122 to 15.
Yeah, Kerry put up 122 against Mayo. I just feel, and this is what I was hoping for. I was hoping for a last four of Dublin, Donegal, and Kerry and Mayo. I think everybody was, you know, the sort of the big four, as you would call it, or the big five. I see it as a big five, and that five for me are ahead of the pack at the moment, Shane. Okay, I think that five are ahead of the pack. Dublin are ahead of the four, and then there's a block of four of Kerry, Mayo, Tyrone, Donegal. On any given day, maybe any of them could beat each other, but I feel if Kerry had got to Croke Park against Mayo, I think it would have been a shootout. There's no question about it. It would have been an absolute shootout, and I think that Mayo or Kerry, if they were handed the goal chances that Tip had been handed early in the game, they would have blown Mayo out of the water in the first half. Yeah. You know, and it's a confidence thing too, Shane. I wouldn't get too carried away with Mayo's performance against Tipperary, and I'll tell you why. When you're winning, you look tremendous. Everything looks tremendous. You go up a notch. Everything is up 10%. You know, you feel full of energy. You feel, re-energized. You feel full of pace and aggression, and that's easy when you're winning and you're in front. And they got a great start. And the flip side of it for Tip is Tip needed the start that Mayo got and didn't get it, and then they start to lose energy and they deflate. And I just feel Mayo are coming into this final a little bit, probably what I would probably call an over-exaggerated performance. I don't think it was as good a performance as everyone's making it out to be, and that's hence why I would have Kerry in front of them at the minute. But then saying that, Shane, on the flip side of it, Mayo's performances, but it's been 2017, I think, since Mayo were in the All-Ireland final. 2017, so let's go back 3 years. So this is a different Mayo side. They've introduced a few new players. They've introduced a few younger players. So it'll be interesting to see. After next Sunday, those two might just alternate a little bit. Who knows?
But what about the way Kerry are moving? Like they obviously got to the final last year, and I've always said this. I said it at the time. They couldn't beat Dublin with 14 men, and then when they played in 15 versus 15 the second day, I felt for most of it, obviously Stephen O'Brien could have set up a tap-in goal for Paul Ganey, I think, in the second half. That might have changed it. But to me, when it was 14 versus 14 or 15 versus 15 in the first game, Dublin had them at arm's length, and in the second game, when it was 15 and 15, Dublin had them at arm's length. So I don't think they're as close as the drawn game suggests. Then this year, obviously you've got Donny Buckley no longer part of it. They won the league title, so that's obviously a plus point. But then a team is picked, what I would have said, quite fearfully against Cork. So O'Bughley playing as a wing forward, I think it was Ronan Buckley as a wing forward, to me, and then Killian Spillane is left on the bench, comes on and does an awful lot of damage. So and then there's all this talk about management and where's it going, etc., and player meetings. So I'm not sure how much of that is true. But to me, I wonder, is the trajectory of Kerry now heading in the wrong direction? Was last year's final an exaggeration of where they're at?
You could be right in a number of those points, and I think when you go back to the first final, people probably said Kerry probably missed their chance. 14 men, Cooper was sent off. That was their big chance. That was their big moment. I felt you're right in the second game, Shane. I felt they were hanging on to Dublin's coattails. I thought it was a false sort of environment of where they were at. But one of the things about them, Shane, is that, and I think a few Kerry stalwarts, the likes of Paul Galvin, different players like that, came out in the last few weeks and said it wasn't that monumental a shock, Cork beating them, because Cork don't fear Kerry, and it was in Cork, it was in Cork's home ground. The conditions were just set up perfectly for a shock, an upset, an underdog. And Shane, I'll tell you one thing about it, and what Cork showed, and it's probably what we're going to speak about later in the show, when we're looking at the All-Ireland final, is that if you actually look at it, it was a prime example of what to do when you're coming into the game as an underdog. Stay in the game, take the favourites down the stretch, see how they react. And it's like any game, it's like any game of football you play in. The longer you're in the game, the more nervous the favourites become. And when Kerry started to miss those couple of handy frees, and Clifford took on that ridiculous goal attempt from 21 yards, and yes, if it had went in, we'd have been talking about one of the greatest goals of the season, but it didn't go in. And all of a sudden then Cork are thinking, we're in this, we have a chance, we have a sniff, and they stayed in it. And to be fair to Cork, they set themselves up in a very, very cynical way, a very attritional way. They clogged the middle third, they made it difficult, and hey, a shock. It was a shock, of course it was a shock, but it's probably not the monumental shocks that people were thinking it were when you base the history and tradition of the two counties and you look at the record of the two counties. So it was only 10 years ago, Shane, that Cork and Kerry were contesting All-Ireland finals, and you were getting into them thinking, who's going to win it, so it probably, but on the back of winning the league and on the back of their performances last year, the championship, and the potential that they have, I think this Kerry team are just not far away at all.